All right, so we've got geometry lessons 4.1, congruent figures. Right, let's get our objectives down to recognize congruent figures and their corresponding parts. Okay, to recognize congruent figures and their corresponding parts. Okay, now it's going to be important that you keep in mind during this time that this idea of order is important. Order is a big deal. So we've lined up those corresponding parts together, and that allows us to name segments and angles, but it also allows us to line them up in order and recognize what parts go with what. And we do that with markings that we learned about in chapter 1. Okay, so sliding on. Congruent figures have the same size and shape when two figures are congruent. When you slide, flip, or turn one so that it fits exactly on the other as shown below. So if I take this one, and I can take this one and slide it right on top of that one. Or if I take this and recognize that it could be a flip across, if I go left to right here, my flip, that'd be a flip over there. Or if I'm noticing that this one could be turned coming around here and fit on top of the other. Okay, those are still congruent figures. It's just that they're in different orientations. Essential understanding that we're working on today. You can determine whether two figures are congruent by comparing their sides and angles. So what we're really thinking about with this is that by the definition of congruent polygons have congruent corresponding parts. They're matching sides and angles. When you name congruent polygons, you must list corresponding vertices in order. So when we're talking about this, I've got A, B, C, and D. So I've got A, B, C, D, congruent to E, F, G, H. Now what I need you to realize is that I secretly gave you exactly which angle A and E correspond with each other. B and F also correspond, C and G, D and H. It's important that you recognize order matters. So whoever is first, that's the one that's congruent to when I put it in as congruent. It also sets up for segments AB, segment AB and segment EF here. Segment BC and segment FG here. Segment CD, segment GH here. And segment DA and segment HE in this one. So keep in mind that order's telling me exactly what's congruent to the other things. Okay, so when I ask, hey, what angle is congruent to which angle, and I give you a congruent statement, you got to keep in mind the order I provide is telling you which one's which. So as we look on and see how we're going to apply this, if I tell you that HI, JK are congruent to LMNO, what are the congruent corresponding parts? So on the sides, all I'm asking you to do, and you'll see this probably more than likely on a test, you'll see me go something like this. Okay, so it's easier for me to grade the test. Otherwise, there's a bunch of combinations you can write things down in. So I'm saying which segment is congruent to segment HK. So go ahead and write that in according to the order you already have. So find HK. Now keep in mind, I gave you a congruence statement. Go to the congruent statement if you can't flip things around. It's not about you jumbling things in your head. It really is about you finding what corresponds with what. So H corresponds with L, and K corresponds with O. Okay, so when I'm looking at this in my statement, and I've got HK, that is the same as LO. Okay, and make sure you put the segment on top. Now I've got KJ. KJ is here. Keep in mind, maybe I used green, bless you. So KJ is here, but when I'm looking at KJ, KJ is right there and it's kind of JK, but that is in the same order as NO. But it's important, which one really is in the same position as K? O. So O should be first. Okay, so it's OH. N when I do that segment ON. Okay, that's what helps me determine these things. So in the next one, I have JI. And when I'm looking at JI, I've got J and I've got I, those are right there. And those are in the same position as NM. Make sure you write it in the right order. So JI, J and N, and M. So I got segment NM in the right order. So IH, okay, so I've got IH sitting up here in my thing. What's that in the same order as? Remember, I just underlined them. You guys write those down. Okay, and I'm looking at I is in the same as M, so it should be ML because order matters. Now I jumbled this just so that we could think about which one was first. Okay. What's really nice when I don't have ambiguity in my angles, and people are like, well, what do you mean? It's very clear that all these angles are the only angle at each one of the vertices, okay? That way I can just use a single letter to represent the angle I'm talking about. So go ahead and decide which angle H is congruent to because of our congruent statement at the top. Go ahead, write those in. So again, although I have this picture over here to the right, my congruent statement is really helping me drive this. So I've got angle H is in the same position as angle L. And angle K is in the same position as angle O. And angle J is in the same position as angle N. And angle I is in the same position as angle M. Are there any questions about the lining up in the order of that congruent statement as we see? We're doing okay? All right, so now it's your turn. Go ahead, and you don't have to jumble them the way I did. I wanted to make sure you knew that order mattered. So make sure you find all the sides and all the angles. Sometimes it's easier to do the angles first, and then it's able to do the sides easier, okay? So if you just take angle W, angle Y, angle S, okay, and write those down, and then look up and go, well, that's in the same position as angle M, angle K, and angle V in that order, okay? So if I take my angles, I got W and M, Y and K, S and V. Are you okay with how I did them? Because that congruent statement is the order they are in. Now, because of the congruent statement, I'm going to look at segment WY, segment YS, and segment WS. Okay, well, that should go in the same order as segment MK, segment KV, segment MV. Now I can double check just to make sure. I got W and M together, Y and K together, because those are the angles that are in the same position. YS and KV, I got WS, and it should be the same as MV when I'm done. And I'm just doing that just to make sure I type things correctly, okay, so I don't screw anything up. Are there any questions about order and congruence and how order matters? Okay. Now, using the congruent parts and stuff we already know from chapter 3. Stuff we already know from chapter 3. Multiple choice. The wings of an SR-71 Blackbird aircraft suggest congruent triangles. What is the measure of angle D? So I'm asking for the measure of angle D off this diagram. It's your turn to figure out which one's which, okay? So we know that angle A plus angle B plus angle C is equal to 180. We already know that. But in design, we know that in this case for my Blackbird, I know that angle A is congruent to angle D. I know that angle C is going to be congruent to angle F. And I know that angle B is going to be congruent to angle E because of the design of the wing, okay, and how it connects to the fuselage of the plane. So if I know that E and D are both 30, okay, I don't know A and D, but I do know F because they gave me C, right? And F and C should be the same measure. So I'm looking really for angle A plus angle, and I'm looking at angle B, which is 30. And I'm looking at angle C, which is 75. That's 180. So I got 105. Angle A, and I should say the measures of, I was a little lazy there, wasn't I? The measure of angle A plus 105 is equal to 180. So I know that this is true, that that's 75. And because they're the same, it's also the measure of angle D. And that's what I was supposed to find. So I'm looking at selection B. Questions regarding that with the stuff we were working with from chapter 3 with triangle angle sum theorem and the other things. We're doing okay? Okay. Now, just making sure I don't have anything else there. Remember that two polygons are congruent if all of the corresponding parts are congruent. So finding congruent triangles, are the triangles congruent? And we're going to justify your answer. Now, if you've already been given markings, that's a good justification. And people are like, what do you mean? Well, remember from chapter 1, we talked about congruence and congruent markings. And we got angle A is congruent to angle E. Do you see how I was able to read that because of the markings, the single tick mark? I know angle B is congruent to angle D, okay? And I know segment, well, let's stay with angles first. What do I know about angle, and these two, by the way, tick marks on angles. Let me know that. That's given, right? What do I know about the angle BCA being congruent? And now I'm asking this because I'm going from B to C to A. And this is helping me name the angles, these orders. So I'm going to go from the other double tick marked angle, DCE. Angle DCE, not A. Boom. What do I know about that angle? What type of angle is it? Yeah, it's a vertical angle. Great. So I know that's true because of VAT. So I got all three angles in my triangles congruent to each other right now, okay, for different reasons. Can you prove all or talk about all three sides being the same? Yeah, and the reason why, okay, the reason why we can talk about those sides being the same is first of all, I got AB, segment AB, and remember, order matters, so I go from A to B and E to D because of how the angles are marked, because of tick marks. They're given. Okay, that was great. Now, I've got BC is equal to 4. Okay, I also have CD equal to 4. And I suppose I can just, I'm not going to rush that. I'm just going to say, hey, those measures are the same. So I got DC is equal to 4. And I know that A and C, AC, and EC, excuse me, I can't put a segment on top of that, AC and EC are equal. Okay, and I'm thinking about order. A, my single, to the vertical, E, my single, to the vertical, they're equal. They are there, and that's because they have the same measure, right? Okay, And I'm talking about BC being congruent to DC, and AC can be congruent to EC because we know about definition of congruence. And right now I have all 6 pieces. Okay, I got my angles. That's 2, that's 3 angles. And I got my sides. I got 1, 2, 3 sides. So I know all 6 of those straight up, kind of a loose proof that I just did. Okay, just to talk about what I know and how I know it. Now, this next one, is triangle ABD congruent to triangle CBD? I want you to look at it. And remember, I have to be able to show that all 3 sides of one triangle is congruent to all 3 sides of another. And then I also got to show all 3 angles of one triangle are congruent to all 3 angles of the other. Okay, so I want you to think about it for about 30 seconds and see what's going on. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, the first thing I know is AD is congruent to CD because of those tick marks. And instead of just the tick marks, I'm going to start using a different phrase. We're going to start saying that was given to us. Okay, that's given to us. Now, there's something that we've done before. And when I've had something congruent or equal to itself, I've used something called reflexive property. Okay, I have something congruent or equal to itself. If you look at the triangles, they're wondering ABD congruent to triangle CBD, and I got BD in both these triangles in the same order. BD is in both triangles and it's overlapped, right? It's the same side. So we can call this, and this is what we do. We know that BD's got to be congruent to itself. This is called reflexive property. Now, I got to ask, do we have any other information about segment AB or segment CB at all? Or do we have any information on any one of the angles? Okay, that we know of right now. There's a couple things we could say, but I can't guarantee that DB is perpendicular to segment AC, so I can't do anything more about angles to show that they're all 3 congruent. So no other information is provided here. The triangles are not congruent. Okay, because I need all 3 pieces of sides, all 3 angles. So 6 pieces to make that congruence because of congruent shapes. If I know polygons are going to be the same, that's how I've got to do it. Excuse me.
Hello. Good morning. Here's your delivery.
Thank you. Thank you for your delivery. Okay. Questions about this? We're doing okay? All right, you guys are doing great. Third angle theorem. Now this one's kind of one of the cool theorems. It kind of follows from what we've been doing. And I want to make sure that you recognize it's nothing out of control or anything for what you guys could think of. If 2 angles of one triangle are congruent to 2 angles of another triangle, then the third angles are congruent as well. Okay? And this really comes from triangle angle sum theorem, because if I know 2 angles in both triangles are the same measure, so say one is 50 and the other is 100, okay, what's the third angle in the first triangle got to be? Well, if that one's 30, the other one would have to be 30 as well, since they have the same measure, right? So it's an extension of triangle angle sum theorem, okay? So you got to keep in mind, that's what this is. So if I already know that B is congruent to E and A is congruent to D, C and F have to be congruent because they have to be the same measure, okay, when we're looking this over. So How would this look like for a proof if we wanted to write something called the third angle proof? In any proof, the first thing we're going to do is write the given. So let's get that down. And remember, this is a proof of the third angle theorem, so I cannot use the third angle theorem. But remember, when I started talking about this as being an extension of the triangle angle sum theorem, we are going to use the triangle angle sum theorem to help us prove this, okay? So in 2, I'm going to get these down to measurements. So I know the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle D. The measure of angle B is equal to the measure of angle C, or E, excuse me, by definition of congruence. After I do that, I'm going to talk about those 2 triangles and their measures being 180 degrees. All right, so now in step 3, I know that the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C is equal to 180 degrees. I also know that the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle F is 180 degrees. And this is triangle angle sum theorem. Sorry guys, we're going to cover this up for a second. As I'm writing, the board's about 1.5 inches off. Now, with that said, I know both those measurements are 180 degrees, so I'm going to substitute it in. So by substitution in 4, I know the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B plus the measure of angle C is equal to the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle E plus the measure of angle F. And that's all by substitution. Now, I want you to start thinking about what I did on that kind of numbers proof with the triangle sum theorem that we were talking about. I am now going to substitute values. Because I know A and D and B and E are equal, I'm going to substitute those in and subtract them out and show that E and F are equal automatically and therefore congruent. Okay, so this is the proof of triangle angle sum theorem. So my next step is substitution. So I'm going to substitute in for A. So keep in mind measure of angle A plus, and I'm going to put this in measure of angle B plus, I've got the measure of angle C here. I'm cloning this because I'm plopping that in for D. I'm cloning this because I'm going to plop that in for E. Okay. Wow, it came right apart on me. Let's group that back together. Okay. So those are together. And then my last one, keep in mind the measure of angle F. And this again, substitution. Okay. Now, I made sure that I color coded those so you could see what is exactly the same. Okay. So now by 6, I should be able to subtract. By subtraction, when I subtract out my A and I subtract out my B, the measure of angle C is equal to the measure of angle F. And that's by subtraction. And then my last step is talking about step 7. I got to have them congruent. So angle C is congruent to angle F because of definition of congruence. And that's congruent angles, but we'll use definition of congruence. Okay, so our next proof, proving triangles congruent. Okay, first thing should be writing down our given. Step 1, LM segment LM is congruent to segment LO. And folks, as you write it down, we're just going to do the segments first. Let's do segments first, and then we'll do angles so we can kind of put them all together so you can see where things are coming from. So MN is congruent to segment ON. All right, now I have one more segment in this triangle, okay, to make them congruent to each other. Look where that segment is located. What do you know about that segment? And I kind of used this already today on the previous one. Take a guess. We're congruent because it's reflexive. It's congruent to itself. Awesome. Okay, so I've got my given for my sides. And we're talking about LN, congruent to itself, LN. Now, there's going to be times where we flip-flop the letters, and we got to keep in mind when we flip-flop the letters, we got LN congruent to LN here, because if you look at the markings in the two triangles, this is a double and this is a double. That's why the order is LN. Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, it's about our order. So in step 2, we got LN congruent to itself, LN in the same order because of reflexive property. And this is of congruence, okay? Now, our sides are all done. Let's look at the angles. So when we do this, we have another given statement. I've got my angles, angle M, congruent to angle O. Angle MLN, congruent to angle OLN, and that is given. Now, after you do that, look at what's missing and think about what we already have. We just did a proof on something called third angle theorem. Because if we have two angles in one triangle congruent to the two angles in another triangle, the third angles of those two triangles are congruent to each other. So by third angle theorem, we can say they're congruent, but we have to use the three-letter name of that angle, angle MNL, angle MNL. MNL is congruent to angle ONL. And that's third angle theorem. Now, do I have all three angles and all three sides congruent to something? Okay, all 6 pieces. So step 5, triangle LMN is congruent to triangle LON because the definition of congruent polygons. And that definition of congruent polygons, all the sides are congruent and all the angles are congruent correspondingly to each other. Okay, now we got one left, okay? And I want you to give it a try and see how it works. Look it over, see what you know, and see what can be used to help you out. Look it over, see what you know. And remember the way it's drawn. Okay, remember the way it's drawn is going to help you out a lot. So look over the picture. The things we know, reflexive, vertical angle theorem, third angle theorem. Will those help us here? Let's do this way. I'm going to write the segments first. Do I need any other segments congruent to anything else? Right now, all the segments are given. So segments are done. This is pretty nice. 2, I have one angle, and that is also given. okay? And I wanted to make sure I separated that out, so I'm emphasizing I just have one angle. What do I know about other angles? I mean, my other angles like angle ABE and angle DBC. I'm going to tell you right now, angle ABE is going to be congruent to angle DBC. What type of angles are they? Yeah, they're vertical angles. So by vertical angle theorem, I've got that made. Now, because of that step, I have two angles in one triangle congruent to two angles in the other. So my third angle in each triangle can be proven congruent to each other. Angle E is congruent to angle C because of third angle theorem. In step 5, my final step, triangle AEB is congruent to triangle DCB because of definition congruent polygons. So again, just like every other notes we've had so far this year, we have a checkoff list inside the front page. Check off the stuff you know right now, okay? Check it off, what you know right now. I'm just waiting for people to get things written down and see where you're at. But today's assignment is a worksheet, same stuff. See, how do you order matters on this? So remember, when you're doing the assignment, order matters on it. Thank you. So remember, our summary objectives today: to recognize congruent figures and their corresponding parts. Write a couple sentences about something that you learned today, about the learning objective, and then rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 4. But remember to check off what you know on the inside part of the title page, so you all can start working towards understanding what we're covering this chapter. And thanks for your time.